Hi friends, welcome back to the Accent Designer. I'm Sam Gazelle, and today's video we're going to be talking about 3 artifacts that are widely used in the UX qualitative research process in product design. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So first of all, we need to understand that there are 2 types of research that are being conducted in any product design process: quantitative research and qualitative research. Quantitative research has everything to do with number, analytics, percentage. For example, if you're trying to understand or collect more information about the percentage of people who prefer to use iOS versus Android, that's quantitative research. If you're trying to understand more about certain population clusters and the population is being distributed across multiple zip codes, that's also quantitative research. But when it comes to diving deeper into the behavior of why, let's say 70% of people said they prefer using iOS versus Android or vice versa, that's where the qualitative research process comes in place. So while the data scientists are busy building algorithms and tools to collect more information, quantitative information about demographics, populations, usage, so on and so forth, you can find the UX researchers and the product designers, on the other hand, busy with things like trying to understand ethnographic background, racial background, demographics, psychographics, trying to reach out to the potential target audience in the addressable market and have these in-person interviews. In general, UX researchers try to focus mostly on behavior, the motivations and pain points that led the population to this result. Right, widely speaking, there are just a couple artifacts that fall under the umbrella of qualitative research. So you can find things like online surveys, in-person interviews, focus groups, moderated testing sessions, unmoderated testing sessions. These are all artifacts that fall under the qualitative research umbrella, but today we're going to be focusing on 3 things. Number 1, secondary research; 2, screener survey or online survey; 3, in-person interviews. I'm going to be starting off with the secondary research. What is a secondary research exactly? So when you start working on a new product or new project, you're always having this assumption or assumptions, plural, in your head. You think that the potential user, you think what kind of product you need to build. And these thoughts are heavily influenced by your subconscious bias and exposure to the market, and possibly the knowledge you have interacting with similar products or other products built by other companies, which is completely fine. But up until this stage in the product building process, we can't really call this anything more than just assumptions. And here comes the secondary research. In a secondary research, you're basically trying to find on the internet articles, studies, or research papers that have been conducted on the same problem or the same topic. And at this point, you're not trying to solution anything. You're not trying to figure out a solution or build an app or website or say, oh my God, we have to build this app and that will work very well for this problem. You don't even know the problem yet. All you have in mind is just like a bunch of assumptions, and you're trying to move from this stage of only having assumptions to have what we call hypothesis. You have a strong hypothesis which reflects much more accurate understanding of the problem space, and this hypothesis will pretty much set the tone for every other artifact in the primary research phase. Once you conduct the secondary research, and once you get to the point where you have more knowledge about the subject matter, you actually get to the point where you can set up some sort of objective. And by objective here, I mean clear identification of the problem statements. The following 2 artifacts in the research process that I want to talk to you guys about: the screener survey or online surveys, and the in-person interviews. So a lot of people, mix screener survey with online surveys and think it's pretty much the same thing. Actually not. They are not exactly the same thing. Online surveys, you're building a more extensive version of a screener survey. So you have more questions, you're covering more topics, you're reaching out to a bigger pool of participants, maybe thousands of participants in this case. And you're basically trying to heavily focus your energy and team capacity on collecting as much information as possible from this stage, the online survey. So you're not prioritizing meeting with the target audience in person. And in this case, the online surveys tend to be more extensive, more time consuming. And I don't mean time consuming in any negative way, but I'm saying it takes more time to finish, anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes. And it really requires a certain type of participants. So for this purpose, we can find paid platforms like Userlytics, user testing, and the way these platforms work, they actually hire participants, and these participants are getting paid to take the survey. I wouldn't say that this is a bad way, because it's not, because those people have certain criteria. Yes, they are getting paid, but they have to meet the criteria. They have, let's say, if you're testing for iOS, a specific product, so you have a filtration process in the beginning. You're asking if this person uses iOS or Android. You're asking if this person is a subscriber or non-subscriber. So you have all the tools you need to make sure you're getting the most accurate results out of the online survey. Comes the second version, or the demo version of the online survey, the screener survey. This one is highly utilized when you're clearly prioritizing in-person interviews and you're trying to send out some screener survey in order to filter the participants you intend to interview, right? And this one tend to be shorter, just like anywhere between 8 to 15 questions. You're trying to ask basic questions about their demographics, but at the end of the survey, I personally don't prefer asking any kind of demographic related questions in the beginning of the survey. I like to start the survey by just having a little bit of context, introduction, to introduce the project I'm working on and the company I work for, and followed by basic questions about the subject matter, and anywhere between 8 to 15 questions, just to build more accurate pool of participants for the interview process. And one of the things that I always try to be very careful and mindful of is diversifying the pool as much as possible. And by diversification, I'm talking about everything: gender, age groups, race, pretty much everything. Try to collect as many insights and much information as possible, and that will not happen if you're focusing your research on one group of people, unless we're talking about a very niche product that requires focusing on one group of people. And now moving on to identifying the objectives of the online survey or even the in-person interviews. So the first method I use in my research process, or online survey and interview process to be more specific, is something called the Lean UX canvas. And let's look at it. So this is pretty much the Lean UX canvas, and it consists of 8 cells or 8 blocks. Each block represents one part of the research process. So the first block here is where I list the business problem, and the way for me to get a business problem is by communicating as much as possible with the subject matter experts, the product managers, and the executives at the company I'm working for. Those are the ones who have a much better understanding of the overarching roadmap for the business, the goals they're trying to achieve in light of the budget, in light of the team capacity. Then I move to block number 2. Based on the problem identification we got from the executives, the subject matter experts, and the multiple back and forth conversations with them, we land on hopefully one unified business outcome. So based on this problem, we need to achieve 1, 2, 3, or X, Y, and Z. And this block over here, the business outcomes, this is not a very solid block, because this one oftentimes changes due to the UX research process that we conduct later on, and how this process contribute to altering the expected outcome. Number 3, users and customers. And again, this is an ongoing block that stays with us for a little bit, because even if the executives and the subject matter experts have good understanding of the possible addressable market, the way for us, the the product designers and the UX researchers, to come up with a more solidified version of the possible users and customers we're aiming for or catering towards. Then block number 4 represents the user benefits. So now we identified the business problem, we identified the business outcomes. Now we can have a basic understanding of what benefits this outcome or this business outcome may result into. Then, based on all these form factors here, the business problem, the business outcome, users and customers, and user benefits, we can start brainstorming some solution ideas. And again, it is not like a streamlined process. So after having all these form factors, filled in, run some brainstorming sessions, and these sessions are most of the times run by the UX designer and product manager on each project. So we try to discuss all the givens and all the insights and findings we came across from our research, and that would be the time for us to start brainstorming what the solutions might be. Now, after covering these 5 blocks, we move into number 6, the hypotheses, or the hypothesis, really depending on the context or the product you're working on. In this block, based on all these 5 form factors, we have a much better understanding of the problem statements, the business outcomes, the users, the solution ideas, the benefits or the expected benefits. In the hypothesis section, we try to answer 3 questions, no matter how many problem statements we have. If we have 1 problem statement, same as if we have 10 problem statements, we try to always answer those 3 questions for each problem statement. The first question is the what the problem is and what is it we're trying to build. The second question is who we're building this for. And the third one is, why do we think this target audience need this solution? And the final 2 blocks, 7 and 8, I'm going to be covering that in the next step, which is going to be the lean survey canvas. So here in the lean survey canvas, we also have a bunch of blocks that we try to dedicate for multiple questions. So each block here represents a question and a step. The first question or the first block, what do we need to learn? So before conducting the online survey, based on the secondary research we had in the beginning and based on the hypothesis we drew, we clearly identify the things that we don't know and we need to reach out to the people in order to understand. Block number 2 is, what information do we know already? And I guess this is, to me at least, sounds self-explanatory, because at this point you had your previous knowledge already, you conducted a secondary research, you've been spending a lot of time back and forth with subject matter experts, product managers, and other people on the team. So at this point, there will definitely be some things you know about the subject matter, about the problem statements. Number 3, who do we need to learn from? Basically just trying to set up some sort of a hypothesis about what kind of potential audience or users we need to reach out to and share the survey with. Number 4, how do we reach these people? So these 2 blocks, 3 and 4, remember what I said in the beginning, guys? These are very, very difficult to assume in the beginning. Even if you have what you consider enough knowledge about the problem statements and you think you have a very accurate definition of what the problem is, assuming that a specific target audience might or might not be interested in the subject matter and participate in a survey is a big mistake. And for this reason, that's at least how I approach it. I try, if I don't have 100% clear idea of what the addressable market is, I try to diversify my target audience as much as possible. So if I missed on specific people groups, I don't miss on the other, right? And with that comes the deployment channels. Based on the people you're trying to reach out to, you define what deployment channels work best for it. So if we're talking about young audience between like teenagers, I'm assuming like social media application would be the best place to reach out to them. If we're talking more about professionals, something like LinkedIn or news websites and business websites would be a much more appropriate venue, so on and so forth, right? So now we finalize the 4 important steps in the beginning. After doing so, we move to point number 5, which is writing down the actual screener questions, identifying the number of questions, and identifying the topics you want to cover throughout the survey. And after you write down the questionnaire and make sure that everything is good, you jump into writing the intro and the ending. And this is actually one of the things I found very beneficial, like not starting off the survey by writing the intro and the ending, because the intro is like one of those things that can be altered or adjusted by what kind of sections covered in the survey. So I would highly suggest leaving it till the very end. And now I'm going to be moving on to some do's and don'ts when writing the screener survey or the online survey questions. These do's and don'ts are covered in a slide, in a PDF slides that I'm going to be leaving the link to in the description below. If you guys want to download it, it's completely free. It's basically the presentation or the PDF deck that I prepared when I was teaching back in the day. So one of these do's and don'ts, one of the very popular do's and don'ts, is the double-barreled questions. Avoid writing questions that ask or touch base on two different topics in the same one. So it adds a lot of cognitive load to the question. It requires a lot of time and effort from the participant to answer accurately, and having such a thing, or if you loaded up your survey with a lot of double-barreled questions, the likelihood for people to drop out and leave it is very high. The second one is loaded and dramatic questions, and it's pretty much self-explanatory. Try to avoid, loaded and dramatic words or phrasing, thinking that this will be more touchy and engage better with people. Is not. Believe me, the results wouldn't be like that at all. Another example of the do's and don'ts. Here, this is actually one of my personal pet peeves. Whenever I participate in a survey and find the questions written in a very tongue-twisting formatting or not concise enough, I drop out. And I don't have any, ill will towards anyone. It's just like I don't really get the point. So that's the reason why I prefer to leave as opposed to writing down anything. Another one is double negatives. Double negatives is just like one of the dominant mistakes out there. I'm guilty of it too. We use it in like our day-to-day conversations. But when it comes to writing down any sort of content, it becomes very problematic. Just a bunch of do's and don'ts here that I managed to put together to help my students, get more clarity, what kind of questions or how to structure the survey questions. And I also added this example checklist for things that, or like, points you want to make sure you have in your survey. And again, like demographics, I would be very careful adding demographics to every single survey. It really depends on the context of your survey and the needs as well. So be very mindful of that. And eventually the deployment channel. So once you get better clarity of the potential target audience, the addressable market, it becomes much easier for you to select which deployment channel works best for you. And of course, there are paid and unpaid deployment channels, as we mentioned in the beginning of this video. So we have user testing, userlytics, try my UI. I guess those are the three ones I personally used before. And the unpaid venues, you can find things like social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram, Reddit. And yeah, that's pretty much about it for briefly how to conduct surveys and just a bunch of do's and don'ts when structuring the survey questions. Have this slide deck in front of you as a reference, and I want you guys to try this exercise. Just give yourself a 15-minute kind of time period. Create a survey structure using the UX Lean canvas or the Lean UX canvas and the Lean survey canvas that we explained earlier in the video. Try to come up with a bunch of questions based on the principles we identified. Right, and now point number 3, in-person interviews. It gives me a much better opportunity to engage in a conversation, ask more open-ended questions, and collect more quality insights. Usually in the online surveys, we tend to be very concise, very straight to the point, ask a lot of multiple questions, multiple choice questions in order to save time. And in-person interviews, what we tend to do is reduce the number of questions, but ask more open-ended questions. So you give yourself as a UX researcher or a product designer much better room to listen and gives the participants a much better opportunity to articulate their thought process the way they want it. So important things in in-person interviews: when you meet with the participants, you have to identify the context. What is it exactly that you're interviewing them for? You have to consider that, and you also have to diversify the interviewing pool as well, much more like we did in the surveys. You have to be very polite and ask them for access to their personal information if they want to share their personal information, and you have to emphasize the fact that their information wouldn't be shared with anyone. And one very important advice is, if you want to record the session, you have to ask them to, because some people don't really feel comfortable having their voice recorded or anything. Again, that was just a very brief intro to how these three artifacts work. I intend in the future to make more videos about in-person interviews in particular, and possibly share some of my in-person interviews that I've conducted before. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and see you next time.